Hello guys, and welcome to my top 10 free agent QB video. Um, Obviously with this list, I did add one player who was informed that they will be released and they won't be with the team moving forward. But other than that, I went over, the spot track QBs, that they say are going to be free agents this year, and obviously, my discretion to who I think really deserves to be on this list. But without further ado, let's start. And we'll go from 10 to number 1. So starting off at number 10, I have Desmond Ridder here. Desmond Ridder, as we know, started his career with the Falcons. They got rid of him, and he was with the Raiders last year and even led them to a revenge game win over his former team. And it's like, well, he didn't play great last year. I think that Ridder still has all the physical capabilities. I also think that, given his history, he clearly didn't mesh well with Arthur Smith. And, I think that he has, the arm strength, the mobility, to be more effective in this league. The major knock, obviously, for him is that he'll be in rhythm and then he'll throw these picks almost like it's a predetermined throw. But I personally think that Ridder, still at a young age, some team can take a chance on him who maybe has, a good QB coach, a good offensive system, and, thinks that they can, turn his career around. I think that people knock Ridder because, first of all, he just wasn't very good on a very talented roster. But as we saw, even this last year, the Falcons they weren't crazy offensively. But that's what I think, about Ridder at number 10. Moving on, we have Jameis Winston. Now, a little bit older, obviously, a little bit past 30, but we saw that he brought an energy, to the Browns last year, after Deshaun Watson going out, and then him, essentially leading his team to kind of an impressive win over the Steelers, in a rivalry snow game. I personally think that Jameis Winston, doesn't have much upside, but he's still able to, drive the ball downfield, and he can still throw some, pretty good footballs. Maybe he's a guy you bring in, to me, that it's like he could be a bridge QB. You could maybe draft a guy who you think just needs a little bit more development is raw, especially with this year's draft class. Nobody being like, oh, this guy's clearly going to be a good NFL QB. But Jameis Winston, to me, it's like he can bring a good energy to your team. And, maybe you can use him as sort of a learning example and be a good teammate to a younger QB who could potentially start for you in years to come. Moving on, we have Russell Wilson, and it is, very clear what my position is on Russell Wilson. I think he is an aging and a declining quarterback. I do think that he can throw the ball up and, give his guys opportunities at 50-50 balls. I don't think he's the guy that's going to lead you, anywhere, though. I think you need the right system. It might be crazy to say, but he needs to go to a team with a solid run game and then guys that, you can get downfield and be mismatches. Last year, the reason I said that he was doing well with the Steelers was because Pickens was balling out for him. And then once Pickens was out, and that, with his injury and, that sort of thing, that's when they derailed at the end of the season. And I just think the amount of, media publicity really got to the team, and just it was a total team failure. But also, to me, Russell Wilson has had on, every team he's been on, starting with the Seahawks, the last, couple of years that he spent with them, they would have late season collapses. The Broncos, obviously it wasn't a late season collapse, but they I guess it was last year. It was a late season class because apparently they were really hot. Even though I was like, I don't buy it. I do not buy that they are doing very well. And it was kind of the same thing. Cortland's son balling out for Russell Wilson and making him look better than he is. But it's like, he does have the tenacity to throw it and do high ball placement. So it's like with the right receivers and weapons, I think that you can make it work with Russell, and really I didn't want to put him on this list, but I was like, I kind of have to, unless I want to make this a top 5 list, which would be kind of weird. But moving on, we have Zach Wilson. Now, many people might be like, oh, why are you, giving Zach Wilson kind of the benefit of all? To me, he was drafted on a terrible team, much like Sam Darnold, which we'll obviously see here, later on the list. And, the Jets were a terrible team, a defensive-minded team, and they pull in Wilson, with the number 2 pick behind Lawrence. And, a kid who apparently had, so much upside, has a strong arm, has enough mobility, to be good. And it's like, to me, I think that, there's going to be some team that's going to take a shot on him that, maybe they put him in competition with a rookie QB they draft. Because, this year is kind of the downside year of like what QBs are available besides a couple of guys. And, essentially to me, if you're going to draft a QB this year, you're going to draft someone who you think is developmental and is raw in the mid rounds, because obviously there's only like 2 guys, Shadir Saunders and Cam Ward. Those are the only 2 guys that seem to be bona fide number 1 or number round 1 talents in the league. But I think that Zach Wilson, if he goes to the right system, and it's like, don't get me wrong, he was beat out by Bo Nix, but Bo Nix was clearly, the plan for the Broncos, them drafting him in the first round. And it's like, I think that Zach Wilson can compete, and I think that he could make, that sort of thing. But it's like, he went to the cursed land of New York, as I'm going to call it, where QBs just, they wither and they die. Or they're dead on arrival, so to speak. Moving on, we have Justin Fields. Now, I honestly have kind of a soft spot for Fields because, not only did he put his heart out for a crappy organization like the Bears, an organization that, who knows, maybe next year they'll turn it around. Knock on wood with me saying they're a crappy organization, but they finally buckled and hired the coach they needed to hire, paying them the big bucks, $13 million a year. But that's besides the point. Fields, to me, they trade up for him, they draft this guy, but they were obviously, they were, under a defensive-minded coach, and without like any real offensive talent when they drafted him. Then the second year they get DJ Moore. He does some good things with Moore. Moore gives the Bears, he gives he gives the Bears, his own opinion, telling him that he wants Fields. He wants Fields. And it's like, it was night and day between that year and this last year, where DJ Moore just looked upset with a lot of what Caleb Williams did. And it was just, I love it as a Packers fan because, I heard all offseason, oh, this is the most talented wide receiver core. Oh, we have Caleb Williams. Look out. But, they also had Eberflus, a defensive-minded coach, and their offensive system was a crazy bad one from a guy who had been the offensive coordinator for a star-studded Seahawk team for the last couple of years. I can't even remember his name. I don't care to know his name because he's not a good coordinator. But it's like, if you have 2 star-studded teams, maybe the Seahawks, I think, aren't, self-proclaimed star-studded. But it's like, I do think that they had a pretty good supporting cast. But it's like, and you're not able to make it work, like you're a bad offensive coordinator. But Fields has always been on a defensive-minded coach's team. Tomlin, the last one here, and he was able to do, I would say, somewhat average and that sort of thing. But I honestly think that he was on a short leash with the Steelers. I think that he was just told to hold down the fort and that sort of thing and not really take that many risks. But to me, Fields, it's like, so many people said that he was the most NFL ready QB or whatever in terms of like experience when he got drafted. And I mean his upside, I guess, is a little, but to me, the same things that were said about Lamar Jackson early in his career, that, oh, this guy can only run, he only does like one read, oh, he doesn't, throw the ball very well. It's like if Fields goes to a team that can actually mold a quarterback and give him a chance and maybe be a little bit patient with him, I think he could be, a franchise QB still. Somewhat of these rankings is that I am, giving these guys kind of the benefit of the doubt and, taking in their upside, with some of these younger guys. But I think Fields could still ball out for some team and make the Bears live to regret it. Because it was honestly my opinion last year that I was like, they should trade out a number one. Let Caleb go to somewhere else. Let them go to the house with a bunch of picks. They could have still got an Odunze. They could have traded down with one of the next, 8 teams or whatever. And then they could have actually went and made a good chance to fix their O-line. And then they would have been a very solid team, because the only things on the team that really were kind of, subpar last year was, I guess you could say, the running game, but their O-line was garbage, and they didn't really block, and they didn't really have a conventional running back. But it's like, and giving Fields a shot, because I really think that Fields could, be good. And it's like under the right system. And maybe he still wouldn't have been because of the offensive scheme, but it's like we saw last year with Darnold, and it's like that he went to a good offensive system in Minnesota. And granted, he had star talent, but he made good reads, he made good throws. It wasn't until the end of the season with the last 2 games, the Lions, and then the Rams, but people like to knock these QBs, and it's like it's not always on them. Moving on, I have Tyler Huntley here. Huntley, I think, is he's been in situations where he's always been behind the franchise guy. I have him here in his Ravens uniform, even though he was traded to the Dolphins, and while he didn't look good immediately when he went to the Dolphins, and that sort of thing, I think this guy has proven in the games that he's subbed in for Lamar, because as we all know, Lamar, besides like last year, had injuries. He had injuries, to him, and it's like Huntley came in and would make good decisions, be mobile, and he's 27 years old. He's not too old for a QB, at least, granted, maybe in 7 years or sign his mobility will decline or something like that, and that sort of thing. But it's like, if you're getting, 5 good years from a quarterback, that gives you time to maybe get another one and plan for the future. But Huntley, to me, has just always been very consistent, and he can throw the ball downfield, and he plays with a lot of heart and a lot of competitiveness. I've just always liked him. He has very limited time, but I think he's always ended up behind the guy who is the guy, a top guy in the league. Not saying Tua may not be a top guy in the league anymore, that sort of thing. But overall, I think that Huntley could go on a team and be a starter, at least for 2-3 years to see what you can get out of him, for cheap too, probably, and he could produce, and he's one of those guys that it's like is a little scary with limited playing time, but I think that he, could help a team that's in a QB needy situation. Moving on, we have Vanilla Vic, Daniel Jones. Now, this is a lot like, Zach Wilson to me, where Zach Wilson got dealt onto the Giants, a New York team, the team that seemingly these QBs go to die. Name the last, the Giants, obviously more recently, they had Eli Manning, but even Eli Manning, somewhat rocky career, had a good number of picks and that sort of thing. And then it's like you move on from him, and you eventually have Daniel Jones, but it's like, they just haven't really had a team that, where it's like they didn't really help this guy with wide receivers. Sure, you had a really good relationship with Slayton last year. It seemed like he was doing pretty well getting it to Neighbors early on, and that sort of thing. But even Neighbors and Barkley, you guys, gave their testament to Daniel Jones. And I think that we all overlook the actual player just because of the amount of hazing that these guys receive. It's like, I don't think that Daniel Jones ends up on the Vikings and then they're like, we're elevating you to active roster for the playoffs, unless they think that he can be a player that can be trusted. And it's like O'Connell, he got Coach of the Year last year. Maybe if, Darnold doesn't come back, imagine if they brought back Daniel Jones and he had a season similar to Darnold, but maybe they had, a scrambling or a running quarterback sort of style as well, just to throw defenses off and do like RPO or something, because obviously Darnold wasn't immobile, but he's not a mobile quarterback. And it's like, the prime example that I think about with Daniel Jones was his highlight to last year was when they played the Cowboys early. The Cowboys, who had essentially just, smothered them in their 2 games, the year prior, to last year. And it's like he was making the throws, he was competing, and it's like they ended up losing. But I was like, how in the world is this game so close when they handled Jones like he was nothing the year prior? And it's like the O-line was obviously a reason behind that, but it's like, it's not like he still didn't have much time to throw in those games, but he was making good decisions and accurate throws. I just think that Daniel Jones deserves a little bit more credit based on team history, talent, and the situationship that he essentially had. So it's like, that's why he's here on this list. And moving up, we have Cooper Rush. Here is another guy who obviously he's a little bit older. He's a guy to me that has always backed up Dak Prescott. He's been a career backup. But he's a guy that he would come in, no complaints, and he would throw it downfield. Now, don't get me wrong, he's a little bit of a loose cannon, but it's a similar situation to me. I think that this is the kind of guy that he's like an upgrade from the bridge QB situation that you would have with Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. So looking at Cooper Rush, he's obviously a little bit older. His style of play doesn't rely on mobility really that much, even though he occasionally runs. But I think that Cooper Rush, showed us that it's like in the sinking ship that is the Cowboys, that he would go in and and shut up and play up. So he could be a guy that goes to a team that maybe, like I said earlier, they want to draft a guy who's raw, develop him for 1 or 2 years, and then they have Cooper Rush as a bridge QB. I don't think he's going to do anything crazy spectacular, but it's like he did well with a team that didn't really have a run game that much. And then later in the year, they had a run game, and they were playing a lot better, and they were and they were closer in a good amount of games. Some of the games were blowouts. They didn't show up to play too, but like, from a team that started off as rocky as they were, as, ridiculous as the offseason antics of the Cowboys were last year, I think Cooper Rush came in, and I think that he's, a professional, where it's like he's going to play and he's going to lay it out on the line, and he's not just going to, he's not going to be one of these guys that's just going to go to a team for the money. He's going to want to compete. Moving on, we have Aaron Rodgers. Now, we obviously don't know if Aaron Rodgers will retire, but I didn't want to, until an official, retirement announcement from him. I am assuming he is a free agent, especially since the Jets, said that they're moving on from him. Now, Aaron Rodgers, to me, everyone wants to, shit talk him, but he's obviously, you see the the Packer in the back, and everyone knows, if you watch this channel, that I'm a Packers fan and I'm a diehard. That's why I couldn't put Rodgers in a Jets jersey here, despite, fully understanding why the Packers moved on from him. But to me, last year, not only did he not really have a run game, but it's like the passing game was clearly like, very rocky and that sort of thing. The whole Mike Williams experiment, very much a failure, and very much shot them in the foot a number of times before they were like, we need to just get rid of him. He's, affecting the team mojo. And it's like, don't get me wrong, the team mojo with the Jets, who the heck knows, what the root, I think we all know the root of the problem, the owner and his son. But moving away from that, I think that Rodgers, the only thing that I can imagine, about Rodgers is that he still has a good arm. He still has a strong arm. He still has the ability to quick release and get it to his guys in a dime. It isn't about arm talent to me. It's about the fact that I think that he does need somewhat of a support system, because you can't have him throwing the large volume of amounts every single game and expect him to be able to produce like he used to, because he, and it's like, it's debatable. The final game of the season against, Miami, he was playing very, very well and throwing the dimes, and he looked like the Aaron Rodgers of old. I think that if you don't have to have him throw it 40 plus times, a number of times, that he can still produce. I think of the Hail Mary he had, and I'm like, this is reminiscent of when he was, the Hail Mary king, montage, and if you guys, want to, see the most successful, like Hail Marys, look it up. I mean, it's always something that, made me feel strongly about Rodgers being one of the best deep ball throwers in the league. And then it's like, and doing everything well. But I think Rodgers, is the second best QB, this offseason, should he hit the market. And it's like, the one downside is you probably only get 1 year from him, potentially, because he did say he's not playing until 45 like Brady, but who knows. But moving on to number one, not a shocker, Sam Darnold. I think that Sam Darnold, and I had said it last offseason, that he made the best decision of his career for himself, the first one that he was able to essentially make, because every other team that he was on, he was either traded to or drafted to. Obviously, he was drafted to one team and they traded him. Panthers traded him. And that carousel, I'm trying to even remember all the teams he's been on, but it's like clearly not very old, for a QB. It's like he's going to be 28 going into next season, not old at all. And it's like, I think that he showed that he had a major growth spurt, and whether or not it helped that he was on Shanahan's team the year prior. And then he went to O'Connell, two guys who do really well with QBs. Obviously last year, you might say that Shanahan, oh, well, he didn't really do much for Brock Purdy to make it easier on him. Brock Purdy looked rough last year, but it's like, everyone has a down year occasionally, but it's like he goes to a Vikings team, and yeah, they have star-studded talent, but it's like Darnold played, and made good decisions. Wasn't a lot of high-risk ball where his guys were just competing for 50-50s. But it's like, I do understand the apprehension behind teams not wanting to sign him. To me, if I was a GM, I would only be willing to pay him $35 million a year or something like that, just because, he could, 1 year wonders are a thing in the NFL. But I do think that it shows he can produce. And, you bring him on, like I said, 35 million, maybe 40 million. And it's like, you do a 3-year contract or something like that is maybe front loaded, and then you offer him an extension after 2 years if he's able to produce for 2 years, because then that you're going to have a good QB for 5+ years. But Darnold, I do think that he will be able to go to a team and produce. I think he's a guy that's going to be understanding that he's not going to be on a star-studded team, but he's not going to force it all the time. He showed patience and the ability to not always just win it. So, that kind of concludes my top 10 list, you guys. Tell me what you think in your comments. I'm sure there's going to be people that disagree with me on this, but overall, this is kind of what the offseason content's going to look like. I think that next Tuesday I'm going to do, the biggest needs and I'm going to go division by division or something like that. And that sort of thing, have discussions that way. But if you like the content and you want to see more NFL content like this, I will be posting twice a week on Tuesday and Friday in the off season, attempting to do it my darndest, as long as I can late into the off season, because obviously, I don't think it's really hit anybody yet, because we just had this Super Bowl, but, give it a few weeks and it's going to be like, I wish we had some sort of NFL content besides, the mock draft spams, which I'm not opposed to, but that's essentially what it becomes, type of thing. But tell me what you think. And this is CastCast. I'm your host, Casty Streeter. And as always, go Pack Go.